The Women of Weeki Wachee. You can find them only in Florida and only on Florida's Nature Coast.
Well, the Nature Coast isn't surprisingly too far away from the Disney coast or the Disney part of Florida, Central Florida. It's on the west side, the Gulf side, about an hour and a half, 2 hours drive northwest of Orlando. And then it goes for about 100 to 120 miles up the Gulf Coast from Tampa roughly to where the Panhandle begins.
Christine Negroni, a Florida native, is just back from a visit to her home state. She says the Nature Coast is where to go to see what she calls wild Florida.
It is. And I have to say that having grown up in Florida, I sort of long for that part of Florida that is so natural and so beautiful, because there is a sense of artificiality to the traditional Disney World kind of destination. So it's not surprising that there are so many people who come to Florida for wildlife viewing, or that there is so much wildlife viewing there, because so much of it is undeveloped.
So what kind of wildlife are we talking about?
It's home to 500 different kinds of birds and alligators, as you know, and all sorts of waterfowl and fish. So it really is a great, great place to see wildlife, and we saw plenty of it when we were there.
And much of that wildlife lives right in the water.
Yes, there's the Everglades kind of marshy. There's also a sort of a dry, deserty kind of look to parts of Florida. And on the Nature Coast where we were, buckets and buckets and buckets of water, salt water from the Gulf, but fresh water and spring water. Now, in the spring water areas, and we saw dozens of springs, probably hundreds of springs.
So there's all that wildlife and all that water, but still the most infamous resident of Florida's Nature Coast may be the humble manatee, if you can find one.
You know, I'm from Florida, as I said, but I always feel like I'm getting a special treat when I see a manatee. I haven't seen a lot of them, but I didn't learn until I was on my wildlife tour that part of the reason for that is they really show up in big, big numbers in the winter, which is not the time I go to Florida because I'm not retired yet. But when retirees may get a better chance to see them.
But if I'm determined to get in some quality manatee time, where should I go?
The manatees like to be around freshwater, so those areas where the Gulf and the springs intersect is a good place for them. They tend to migrate down in the wintertime and go to where warm water can be found, like power plants where they discharge warm water. And so there are pictures that we saw of some of the places where we looked at the manatees, and we did see them. We did get a chance to see them in twos and threes, but I've seen pictures of them in the wintertime where you see them by the dozens, like ants on an anthill. And that in the photographs is just, heart-stopping. I'd love to be down there some winter and get a chance to see them in that kind of number.
All right, finally then, just who are these Women of Weeki Wachee?
Weeki Wachee Springs is I would have to say, the mother of all Florida amusement parks. It started back at the end of World War II, and when a fellow had this idea. He was a Navy diver, and he had this idea that there was all this water, all this beautiful clear water. Why not throw some women in the water, teach them how to swim underwater? And he devised a breathing apparatus that they could use, and then have them be beautiful in their bathing suits and perform for the crowds. And so they took one particularly large spring and submerged a theater right into it. So it looks like, you're in an auditorium, but in fact you are in the spring. And he put up these panes of glass, and then these women trained these women to swim underwater.
Make no mistake, the Women of Weeki Wachee are trained professionals.
So when you see them, they have these little air tubes. They're very small and inconspicuous. So it looks as if they're just underwater without breathing anything. And occasionally they put the tube in their mouth and they take a breath through their mouth and they dance and they perform. And it's such athleticism. It's athleticism and ballet and Esther Williams all rolled up into one. It's just beautiful. This is a second and third generation of women, and now there are men who perform at Weeki Wachee, but it is classic. It's like the American diner. It's a classic attraction that's thrilling, that's athletic, that's beautiful, and it harkens back to the old Florida.
Oh, and if the women of Weeki Wachee by themselves aren't enough for you, they are swimming in a natural spring, so they usually have company.
They're not alone. I mean, fish swim up to them. There's one little turtle that apparently, is in every performance, and one of the women told me later on that if that turtle gets in the way, she says, we just push him out of the way if that turtle gets in the way. So it's very wild and retro, and I think a real jewel of Florida's nature coast.
Beat that, Uncle Walt. More from Christine Negroni at GoNowKnowHow.com.